Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Sidney Sachs, and this is Chuck Mason. Welcome, Chuck. I'm delighted that you can join us. Before we get into further things, I want to say that Chuck is the president of the Fairfax Genealogy Society, and then you're also a certified genealogist.
Yes.
Do you want to give your webpage for the Fairfax It's
fxgs.org.
And if you leave that X dot, you end up with something Chinese or something?
No, you end up with the Federation of Genealogical Societies, which is a big national organization. So that's why we have the little X in there.
Yeah, but one time I did what I thought was, and I ended up with some Oriental thing. And for months after that, I kept getting email from them. It finally stopped.
Oh,
I
don't know what caused that.
I don't know. I thought it was... Maybe I did Fairfax County Genealogy, and FCGS,
yes.
Which is what it sounded like to me.
Yes.
So anyway, it's fxgs.org. So okay, well, get that straight. Okay, we wanted to talk about estate inventories today. What are the estate inventories, and because I never heard of them before, and where do you find them?
Well, estate inventories under the probate law, if there was a will and that was filed with the court, or if there wasn't a will and someone petitioned the court to become the administrator, the first step after the court approves either the executor or the administrator is for an inventory to be taken of the assets of the estate, whether it be real estate or whether it be personal property and the things that are in the house and other things. That inventory was supposed to be taken and filed with the court. That helped to determine what the assets really were, because a lot of times the will may be very vague, and of course an administration is not going to give any indication of what the person actually owned. And that inventory was done usually by the executor and the administrator, and then two other people appointed by the court. And they went through the house or the person's room if it was an individual, and they made an accounting of the items, the number of items, and then gave them a value. And then that was filed with the court. And today it depends on where the probate records are filed in the courthouse, whether they've been recorded in a will book, and in some places the inventory is then recorded after the will, and in other cases it's only in the original probate package. In Fairfax County, in the old deed books, or will books that I have found the inventories recorded there. When I did research in New Jersey, the only thing I found in the will books was the will and a codicil, which is an addition to the will if they made one. The inventory was only with the probate package, and these were or have been microfilmed for the old records in both here in Virginia and Fairfax County in New Jersey. So you basically can find them at the courthouse, but a lot of them now are available on microfilm through various sources like the Family History Center.
Now, does the will ever get specific enough that you didn't need the rest of it?
Not really. It was a requirement by law under the probate law for them to do the inventory regardless of what the will said, because the other thing is things could be mentioned in the will that the person then, after they wrote the will, gave something to the person they wanted it to have it, or they could have given it away to someone else and it not be there. So it really is an accounting, and this is even true today. Technically, when an administrator or an executor is appointed by the court today, they're supposed to do an inventory of the assets of the estate.
Now you've said technically and supposedly, how many, when is it done, about 50% of the time?
Technically, it depends. My parents have passed away in the last 5 years, and also an uncle, so I ended up as the executor of both my parents' estates and the administrator of my uncle's estate. And I was able to unload the personal possessions without having to inventory them. My parents lived in their house for 50 years and saved everything. So you can imagine what was accumulated and what I would have had to have inventoried had they really said you've got to do an inventory.
So the probate courts, they really don't, you know, if there's no problem, they don't insist on it.
As long as there's no problem. My sisters and I basically decided that we would, among the four of us, divide things up and get rid of the things we didn't want. But particularly if you have somebody who really wants to be a chink in the armor, let's say, and really, you know, cause problems, then you're definitely going to have to do that line by line, item by item inventory.
So you find them either under the probate records or under the will itself.
Under the
depending on
probate package or the will. It depends on what they copied into the will books. Now today, I don't think they use will books anywhere. I think, you know, in the 20th century they started to just use the probate packages. And so you only find the package, which includes the will, the inventory, and the other paperwork to go along with the estate.
Yeah, okay, so you'd have that. I guess there's other ways around it too, like if you have, what do you call it? Oh, well, let's see. What was included? Money?
Anything at all. There was supposed to be well, of course, the real estate may be mentioned, and that may be handled separately depending on what it says in the will. But the inventory would include everything that's in the household. If they had money in a bank, if they own stock, if they had a business somewhere, you may get a separate second inventory. You know, if they lived out in the country or they lived in town but they had a store on Main Street, that store may have been inventoried. My third great grandparents that I brought a couple of examples today, they had actually a sawmill and owned almost the equivalent of 4 square miles of land that I have tracked in Atlantic County. And so they had a lot of outbuildings because they had horses and pigs and chickens and cows. And so they had barns and sheds and things, and all of that had to be inventoried and a value set on it.
Wow, that must have taken a long time to do.
Well, his was, if I remember correctly, about 31 pages, and hers was 27. Over the years, she had disposed of some of the things that was on the original inventory.
And that would have included bank information and money?
Bank information. She happened to have a safe in the house, and she had some gold and silver in the safe, and so all of that was included there. The family Bible was mentioned, and all kinds of things that were of interest.
Now, did they have a will too?
Yes. Actually, he had a will, and he had divided up things that he wanted to go to my third great grandmother and also to their children and also to a grandchild whose father, one of their sons, had died. And so they had this one grandchild that he specifically mentioned in the will. And then he wrote a codicil, which is a change to the will, and it can sometimes add things or it can take away things. It can say, I've changed my mind and I'm not going to leave my son this house, I'm going to do this or that. And it can also clarify things, because in some cases it may not have been clear in the original will what their intent was. Mm-hmm. And so they he had done the codicil. Basically, it was a little more specific on what livestock and supplies he wanted to be sure my third great grandmother got out of the estate. And then it's particularly important if you don't have a will and you have an administrator, that inventory be done, because then it's the probate laws that decide who gets what. And so they really want that inventory done so they know what assets the estate has so that they can be divided up under the probate law.
Now, I would imagine children get things first under those, or does that vary?
Actually, under the old probate laws, the wife got a third of the estate, the children got a third, and a third went to the others, whoever they may be.
Oh.
And so, now under probate law, basically I think most cases, everything generally goes to the wife if there is not a will. And then the children, if they're minor children, though, would get something. But if all the children are adults, then I believe everything goes to the wife.
Well, that's, I guess, why I've heard, when people were upset when a parent was remarrying or something,
Yes.
afraid that they wouldn't get anything. And
Yes.
I guess that led to the prenup agreements.
A lot of times, yes, that was a big lead to the prenuptial agreements that we have.
And who set the values on these items?
Well, the administrator or the executor and the two people that the court appointed, and a lot of times these were the same people. If you read a lot of inventories, you will see the same group of men being appointed by the court, and they settled on a value. They looked at things and determined a value, because of course if furniture and things were in good condition, they're going to be worth more than, or if a horse is very old, it's not going to be of much value.
And if it's the same people that are doing it, they generally have an idea of
generally
what the
have an
market
idea,
value
yes.
of things
Yes,
are.
they have an idea of the community and the values of things and what things would cost new. And
Now, these are court appointed. Do they get paid then? Did they get?
they did get some kind of a fee, I believe, in most places, yes. So they didn't do it for free, but it certainly wasn't big money, but if you're doing it often enough, it could be probably a good supplemental income.
Are there any problems with the inventories?
Well, there can be problems with the inventories. Handwriting is one of them. Trying to read some of them. Another one is spelling of things and abbreviations of things, because of course people didn't have the education that we have today. So in general, with all records, people were free to spell things as they sounded them out phonetically, as long as they could read them. And of course then you have abbreviations that, it can look like 2 or 3 different things, so you're not always sure. Another thing with the inventories, particularly earlier ones, they were done in British pounds because we were a British colony, or in some cases we had the various colonies or the early states that had their own monetary system, and so they may be valued at the British pound or the state or the colony's monetary system. So determining what that real value is today might be a little bit more difficult.
I imagine there are many things that we in our 21st century wouldn't even know what they are. Farm implements and all sorts of things that don't exist anymore.
And that's when you get out the genealogical dictionaries and the old dictionaries and you look these things up.
I found having a very old dictionary, 100-year-old dictionary, helps.
Yes.
Because it explains words that are no longer used.
And one of the other great things that I find about some of the old dictionaries, a lot of them had little pictures of things beside the words. So even sometimes the explanation doesn't quite give you the picture, but if you've got a little example there, it really is a big help.
Now, did you have some examples of, or have they been shown?
I
did
have some examples from my third-great-grandmother, Rebecca Pancoast's inventory, and basically what they did when they went through the inventory or through the house to inventory it, they went room by room and they listed the things that were in the room. So in some cases, you may not know for sure what the room was. They may just say it was the east room or a porch or something, but looking at the items that were in there may tell you, okay, they use this for food preparation, or they use this basically for storage, that kind of thing. So, from that inventory, I found that their house had at least 10 rooms in it. Wow. It had a cellar, it had 2 hallways, and it had 3 different attics. So that was a great description of the house. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I know, of course, they had 15 children that wow. all lived to adulthood, which was unusual in the 1800s. And so sounds they like had a large family, so they needed a big house.
It sounds like if they have 3 different attics, they must have been adding to the house as the family grew.
Probably was a case of they added over the years, and then the inventory listed all the various things in the rooms, and I found a number of interesting things. It told me that there was a family Bible. Of course, I knew there was a family Bible because I had found a transcription of it. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened to the Bible. I knew who had it from the transcription that was done in the 1950s, rather, and that person no longer lives, so it got passed on somewhere, but nobody knows. But I've got that transcription of the Bible, and they had some guns, and she had a safe that had some gold and silver in it. She also had a bank account, which that was something that was not the norm for a lot of people that I have run into. And the description gives some of the food items that were there, so I have some idea of what they ate. And I always thought my love for sauerkraut came from my mother's Pennsylvania Dutch ancestors, but actually Rebecca and Ambrose had a sauerkraut cutter, so they made their own sauerkraut, evidently, and it gave me a lot of description because of having the farming that they were doing. It gave me the description of the barns and the sheds and some of the livestock and the carriages and things that they had. So it was really a great deal of information that they had in that inventory. Others are not that descriptive. The shortest one I found was a lady who had a gold watch and a good petticoat. And they were inventoried in the inventory, but she also had provided a will and had told who she wanted those two items to go to. And that's the thing that you run into very lengthy or very short inventories. But I think the inventory is really better than having the will, because it gives you so much insight into what their lives were like. They
might not have listed everything in the will. They just listed the things that were important. Or yes. That somebody in particular
yes.
wanted.
Yes, particularly like with Ambrose and Rebecca's inventories, that food, that varied from time to time, so you wouldn't really want to list that in a will, but that gave me a great deal of information about the fact that they probably raised their own chickens and pigs and things based on
Now, where did they live?
They lived in Atlantic County, just at the area where Gloucester County, Cumberland County, and Atlantic County, New Jersey join.
New Jersey, okay.
Yes, New Jersey. Yes, and actually when they bought the land, it was in Gloucester County, and then in 1837 the county split, and they were in the portion that became Atlantic County. And so in looking for records, it's also a good reminder to remind people that you need to know where they lived and what the county border changes were, because you have to go back to Gloucester County records to look up the deeds for where they purchased that land.
I think it always shows that you have to have know some history.
Yes.
No matter where you are
yes.
researching. never liked history before until I got into genealogy, but now then I began to, it began to be more personal, and you understand why you have to know this stuff.
And I loved history. American history was my thing in school. Math and science, forget it. My father and I fought over those grades, but history, I always got good grades. I've always loved history, and that's the unfortunate part. I didn't get into genealogy until I was in my early 40s, so a lot of opportunities, had I pursued genealogy, are missed.
Well, yeah, but then genealogy wasn't big until 20, 30 years ago, and you didn't even think of that as a profession before.
Well, that's true. I mean, there were people who had some interest in genealogy. Usually they wanted to join the DAR, the SAR, the Mayflower Society, or something like that, but the average person didn't necessarily want to. I had my grandfather's sister, one of my great aunts. I have a letter that she wrote to my mother and her brothers and sisters, and she had evidently in the 1960s or early 1970s used or hired a genealogist, supposed genealogist, to do some research on the family that had come over from Scotland. And her warning is, beware and stay away from those genealogists. They only want to take your money.
Well, I don't think, a few maybe knew what they were doing, but I was always I was always interested in my family. I wanted to know where they came from and all. But it never occurred to me that I could actually do research. Particularly because my parents came from Germany, and I figured, everything was destroyed. Of course, Germans have marvelous records, as we know now. But that never occurred to me until I went to my first genealogy meeting and started getting into it. You mean I can really write? And I think when I got my first answer to my first letter, it was like turning a complete page and starting everything, and that was really exciting to me.
Yes, and I mean, there's so much that you can learn about the family. I mean, people sometimes get into genealogy and they just want to know, when were they born and where, and who did they marry and where, and when did they die, and but when you get into things like the estate inventories, it really gives you an outlook or a picture into their lives and what their life was like. And I do a lecture on this particular topic on estate inventories, and my title is Rich Man, Poor Man, and my example is, what were Rebecca and Ambrose? And I've actually calculated from an online source that you can find the value of currency or money every year up to about 3 or 4 years ago. It's that current, and you can look at the value, and Ambrose's estate was based on the value of the most recent charts that are available. He had just under $250,000 in value. Now,
I would have thought it would be even more.
Well, Rebecca's was a little less. Of course, she had less, and the dollar had slumped down a little bit, so it wasn't worth quite as much as it was when her husband died. But she still had over $300,000.
That's a lot of money.
Money that certainly, I think they were definitely better off than the average person, and probably were on the wealthy or rich side. And I just want to know, where's my portion of it?
Where did it all go till it dribbled down to you?
Yes, well, with 15 children and lots of grandchildren over the years, and some of the children fell on hard times, and over the years, that was another thing that was mentioned and is mentioned in inventories, is if people have borrowed money from the person, then that's a debt to the estate. So that's usually included in there. And in Rebecca's, there were a couple of loans that she had made to children and a couple to other neighbors in the area, and some of those were marked that this is the loan, but it's doubtful that it's going to be collected. So that's an
Marked it, and nobody
offset.
had to try to collect it either?
You
Or
know,
just
well,
forgiven
they
and-
usually they tried, but they knew the circumstance of the people that owed the money. They just were on hard times, you know, may have had health problems and couldn't really earn much of a living, and so it was doubtful they were ever going to be able to actually pay that money back. So they can really, with an inventory, tell you a whole lot about the person. Particularly the more detailed they are, the better they are. But even little tiny things, I mean, with that lady with the petticoat and the gold watch, you know, that tells me they were her most valuable possessions.
A gold watch was an expensive item.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
it's not like buying a $5 watch at Kmart these days.
No, that was probably a considerable sum of money, and it didn't say so, but it may have been something she may have inherited from her mother or an aunt or someone. So, you know, it was a prized possession.
Well, I think most genealogists, when they first begin, they just look for the dates.
Yes.
And I mean, that's obviously the first thing that you want to do. And then when you've got it going back a few generations, well, let's see how they lived. And then you start getting into more, and then keep wanting to find out more details about them. And
Yes.
that's how you get into that. We've got about a minute and a half left. What else do you want to say about the estates or?
Well, I don't think there's a whole lot other than, you know, you definitely want to go out there and explore and see what there is. The other thing is, even if you don't find an inventory for your ancestor, if you find other family members or even sometimes neighbors, that can give you a little bit of insight into the family.
Where would you write? You said it's probate. Now, how do you write?
Well, it depends on what the actual county courthouse has been able to do.
Okay, so you write to the county courthouse,
The
find
county
out what they have.
courthouse and find out, in some cases, records have been turned over to the state. For early records, the place that I always turn to is the family history library in Salt Lake and see what they have filmed, because a lot of these early probate records and land records and other records are on microfilm. And if you live or you travel regularly to where your ancestors lived, like my family still lives in New Jersey, so I go up there often. But if I had people out in, say, Kansas, I don't get out there or wouldn't get out there that often, so you can borrow the film through the Family History Center and look at the actual records.
Thank you very much. It's
Thank
been,
you for having
very
me.
informative. It's something I knew nothing at all about.
And now you know to go out and look for those inventories.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.